The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room Kang Do-hyun had ever stood in. It stretched out in every direction like a stadium built for giants, with hundreds of floating platforms arranged in a massive circle. Each platform held a delegation from a different species. Some were tall and thin like glass sculptures. Some were covered in fur or scales or shells. Some didn't even have bodies that made sense to human eyes. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, on a small platform near the bottom, where nobody important ever sat, stood Do-hyun, Earth's junior technical representative, wearing a plain gray uniform and trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Humanity had held a seat on the Galactic Council for only 11 years. In a room full of civilizations that measured their histories in tens of thousands of years, 11 years was nothing. Humans were the new ones, the ones that other species smiled at the way adults smile at children trying to sit at the grown-up table. Do-hyun was not even a real diplomat. He was an engineer who had been assigned to the trade summit because Earth's actual ambassador had fallen sick 2 days before departure. He had been told to sit quietly, take notes, and not cause any problems. That was the entire mission. So when the Valori Dominion called his name in front of the entire assembly, Do-hyun felt his stomach drop straight through the floor. The Valori were one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy. Their people were tall, elegant beings with pale skin that could glow with soft bioluminescent light, a trait they considered sacred and pure. Their king, Tavel, appeared on the chamber's central hologram, his face calm and cold, light rippling gently across his cheekbones as he spoke. He announced that the Valori Dominion wished to extend a gesture of friendship to humanity. As a sign of goodwill, he would offer his eldest daughter, Princess Yuna, in a traditional bonding contract to Earth's representative. The chamber went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter started. It was not loud, open laughter. It was the worst kind, the soft, knowing kind, the kind that hid behind hands and polite coughs. Do-hyun could hear it rippling across the platforms like wind through dry leaves. Every delegation knew exactly what this meant. Princess Yuna was famous, but not for good reasons. She was the daughter of King Tavel, and a concubine whose species had never been identified. Yuna had never been able to produce the sacred bioluminescent glow. Among the Valori, that made her broken, cursed. She had been born under a dead star, they said, and no amount of royal blood could wash that stain away. She had been hidden in sealed chambers for most of her life, kept out of sight like a family secret that everyone already knew. And now the king was giving her away to humans, the youngest, weakest, most insignificant species in the room. It was not a gift. It was a message. It was the Valori telling the entire galaxy that humans were so far beneath them that they could be used as a dumping ground for unwanted royalty. Ambassador Soren, a sharp-faced Valori diplomat with a smile that never reached his eyes, stepped forward to present the terms. The bonding contract was official and legally binding under galactic law. If Do-hyun refused, it would be considered a direct insult to the Valori Dominion, which could result in trade sanctions, political isolation, or worse. Do-hyun stood very still. He could feel every eye in the chamber watching him, some with amusement, some with pity, a few with curiosity, wondering what the little human would do. He pressed the small communicator hidden behind his ear. "Jisoo," he whispered, "are you hearing this?" Up in orbit, aboard the human starship Baekdu, Han Jisoo was already on her feet, her face tight with anger. She was Do-hyun's communications officer, and the closest thing he had to backup. "I'm hearing it," she said through the channel. "It's a trap, Do-hyun. They're trying to humiliate us. If you accept, we become the galaxy's joke. If you refuse, they use it as an excuse to crush our trade agreements." "I know," Do-hyun said quietly. "So what are you going to do?" Do-hyun looked up at the hologram of King Taevel. The king's expression was perfectly composed, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, like a man who had already won the game before the pieces were set. Then Do-hyun looked down at the lower entrance of the chamber, where a small figure was being led in by two Valori guards. Princess Yuna was smaller than he expected. She wore plain, stripped-down robes, a sign he had read of low status in Valori culture. Her skin was pale but dull, without any trace of the glow that her people prized so highly. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She walked the way someone walks when they have already accepted that nothing good is coming. She looked like someone who had been told her whole life that she was nothing, and had finally started to believe it. Do-hyun was quiet for a long time, long enough that the laughter in the chamber faded and was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Ambassador Soren raised one eyebrow, waiting. Then Do-hyun stepped forward. He bowed, not to King Taevel, not to Soren, not to the council. He bowed to Yuna. The chamber went completely silent. "I accept," Do-hyun said. Then he turned to Yuna and spoke directly to her, which was something no one in the room had expected. In Valori custom, bonding contracts were negotiated between families, never with the person being offered. But Do-hyun didn't seem to know or care about that rule. "My name is Kang Do-hyun," he said, his voice steady and simple. "I don't know your customs very well, but where I come from, we greet people properly before anything else. It's nice to meet you." Yuna looked up for the first time. Her eyes were wide, confused, and searching his face for the trick, the cruelty, the hidden knife that surely had to be there. She found nothing but a man with a calm face and honest eyes, standing in a room full of people who were laughing at both of them. King Taevel ended his transmission without another word. Ambassador Soren's smile faltered for just a moment, before he turned away. The council delegates began murmuring among themselves. Do-hyun offered no grand speech. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. Yuna hesitated, then followed. Behind her, a quiet young woman named Nari, her only handmaiden, the only person who had stayed with her through all the years of isolation, picked up the hem of her own robe and hurried after them. The three of them walked down the long corridor that led away from the grand chamber. Behind them, the sound of soft laughter still echoed off the walls. He just kept walking, steady and unhurried, as if the laughter of an entire galaxy meant absolutely nothing to him. The human starship Baekdu was not impressive by galactic standards. It was a mid-class vessel with a crew of 43, built more for function than beauty. The hallways were narrow, the lighting was warm but plain, and the walls hummed softly with the sound of engines that were always working just a little harder than they should. To Yuna, it was the strangest place she had ever been. She had spent most of her life inside the sealed chambers of the Valori royal palace. Those rooms had been beautiful in the cold, empty way that prisons can be beautiful. High ceilings, polished stone, light that came from nowhere and went nowhere. No windows, no warmth. Servants who never looked her in the eye. Guards who stood outside her door, not to protect her, but to make sure she stayed out of sight. Now she stood in a small cabin aboard a human ship, holding a folded blanket that Do-hyun had handed her before excusing himself. He had given up his own quarters for her without being asked, and without making it seem like a sacrifice. He had simply said, "This one has a window. I thought you might like that." And then he had left. Yuna sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blanket in her hands. It was soft. It smelled clean. It was such a small thing, and she did not understand why it made her chest feel so tight. Nari stood near the door, her hands folded, watching Yuna with careful eyes. Nari had been with Yuna since they were both young. She was not just a handmaiden. She was the only person in the Valori court who had treated Yuna like a real person, and not a problem to be managed. When Yuna was sent away, Nari had not been ordered to follow. She had chosen to. "He gave us his room," Nari said quietly, as if testing whether the words were real. Yuna said nothing. She pressed her fingers into the blanket and stared at the small round window. Outside, the stars were moving slowly as the ship turned toward its course. She had never seen stars from a window before. Over the next several days, Do-hyun did something that confused Yuna more than any cruelty ever could. He left her alone. Not in the cold, isolating way the Valori had left her alone, but in the gentle way of someone who understood that a person needed space before they could feel safe. He did not summon her. He did not give her orders. He did not ask her to perform any role or duty. He simply told the crew that they had two guests, introduced Yuna and Nari by name at the next meal, and then sat down and ate his food as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Jisoo was less welcoming. She sat across from Do-hyun in the communications room on the second day, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You know this could be an intelligence operation," Jisoo said, flatly. "The Valori could have planted her to gather information." "I know," Do-hyun said. "And you're just going to let her wander around the ship?" "She's not wandering. She's been sitting in her room for 2 days staring out the window." Jisoo leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You're too soft, Do-hyun." "Maybe," he said. "But if she's a spy, she's the saddest spy I've ever seen." It was on the 4th day that Yuna finally left her room on her own. She had heard music coming from somewhere down the hallway, a soft, unfamiliar melody that one of the crew members was playing from a small speaker in the common area. She followed the sound and found herself standing at the entrance of a room where several humans were sitting together, eating, talking, and laughing. They noticed her and went quiet for a moment. Then one of them, a young technician with messy hair, smiled and said, "Hey, wanna sit down? There's extra rice." Yuna did not know what rice was. She sat down anyway. That was the beginning. Slowly, carefully, like an animal that had been kept in a cage learning to walk on open ground, Yuna began to exist among the humans. She ate with them, though she barely spoke. She listened to their conversations, their jokes, their complaints about the food and the engine noise, and the captain's terrible taste in music. She learned that humans touched each other constantly, a hand on a shoulder, a pat on the back, a playful shove. In Valori culture, touch between anyone below the royal family was restricted. Here, it was as natural as breathing. Do-hyun noticed things. He noticed that Yuna flinched when someone raised their voice, even in excitement. He quietly asked the crew to keep the volume down around her, and they did without question. He noticed that she barely ate, so he started sitting near her at meals and eating slowly, making the space feel unhurried and safe. He noticed that she stood at windows whenever she could, staring at the stars as if she had never been allowed to look at them before. He gave her access to the ship's library and cultural database. She began reading human history, not the wars and empires, but the stories of people. People who had been cast out, forgotten, abandoned. People who had been told they were worthless and then proved the world wrong. She read for hours, curled up in her cabin with the blanket Do-hyun had given her, wrapped around her shoulders. One evening, Nari came to Do-hyun while he was working alone in the engine room. She stood at the door for a long time before she spoke. "Why are you being kind to her?" Nari asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. Do-hyun looked up from his work. "Why wouldn't I be? Not like this. Not without wanting something." Do-hyun put down his tools and thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want anything from her. She didn't choose to be here. The least I can do is make sure she doesn't regret it." Nari stared at him. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway and into Yuna's cabin. She sat beside the princess, took her hand, and cried for the first time in years. Yuna held her, and did not ask why. She already knew. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the story of the human who accepted the Valori King's discarded daughter had become entertainment. On galactic communication networks, it was treated as a joke. Clips of the ceremony were shared with mocking commentary. Cartoons were drawn of a tiny human dragging a broken Valori behind him, like a child pulling a damaged toy. The phrase human inheritance became slang for receiving something worthless. Ambassador Soren sent a private message to Do-hyun, dripping with false politeness. He asked how Do-hyun was enjoying his generous gift, and whether the princess was adjusting to her new station. Do-hyun read the message, closed it, and did not reply. The Baekdu arrived at New Incheon on a clear morning. New Incheon was humanity's largest colony world, a green, mountainous planet with wide rivers and open skies. It was not luxurious by galactic standards, but it was alive in a way that space stations and sealed palaces could never be. Yuna stepped off the ship and stopped. She stood on the landing platform and looked out at the world in front of her. Mountains rose in the distance, soft and blue-green, under a sky so wide it seemed to go on forever. Wind moved through the trees below, carrying the smell of grass and rain and something she had no word for. She had never felt wind on her face before. Do-hyun stood beside her, hands in his pockets. He did not explain the view. He did not tell her what to feel. He did not rush her. He just let her look. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Yuna felt something crack open inside her chest. Something small and frightened and desperately alive. And she thought that maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to not be thrown away. 6 months changed everything. Yuna had arrived on New Incheon as a ghost, thin, silent, flinching at loud sounds and open spaces. 6 months later, she was still quiet by nature, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of someone afraid to be heard. It was the silence of someone who was listening, learning, and choosing her words carefully because she finally believed they mattered. She had started working, not because anyone told her to, but because Do-hyun ran the colony's small engineering and research lab, and Yuna had wandered in one afternoon, curious about the strange machines humming on the tables. Do-hyun had looked up, smiled, and said, "Want to see how it works?" That was all it took. It turned out that Yuna understood machines in a way that no one expected. Do-hyun's lab had been working on bioorganic technology for years, living systems that could grow, adapt, and repair themselves, used for everything from medical implants to ship hulls. The research had been slow and frustrating. The bioorganic cells were unstable. They grew too fast or too slow. They rejected human interfaces. The team had been stuck for months. Then Yuna touched one of the culture tanks, and the cells inside it calmed down. It happened so quietly that nobody noticed at first. Do-hyun had been running a calibration test on the other side of the lab when his instruments suddenly showed a perfect stability reading, something they had never achieved before. He walked over and found Yuna standing by the tank, her hand resting lightly on the glass, her eyes half closed, her expression peaceful. "What did you do?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I just felt what it needed." Do-hyun stared at the readings for a long time. Then he called Jisoo. It took 2 weeks of careful testing to understand what was happening. Yuna's mixed heritage, the thing the Valori had called a curse, the reason she could never glow, had given her something far rarer than bioluminescence. Her body produced a unique bioelectric frequency that could communicate with and stabilize organic technology at a cellular level. No pure Valori could do this. No human could do this. It was something entirely new, born from the combination of two bloodlines that were never supposed to mix. The Valori had thrown her away because she couldn't glow. They had never thought to ask what she could do instead. Do-hyun sat with Yuna that evening on the steps outside the lab, watching the sun go down behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep, quiet purple. Insects sang in the grass around them. "You could change everything," Do-hyun said, carefully. "The research we've been doing, you could push it forward by decades, maybe more." Yuna was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you're telling me?" "No," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you can do. But it's your choice. I'm not going to use you for anything. If you want to walk away from the lab and never touch another tank, that's fine. If you want to help, the door's open. Either way, nothing changes between us." She looked at him. 6 months ago she would have searched his face for the lie, the hidden demand, the trap. Now she just saw Do-hyun, tired, honest, sitting on the steps with dirt on his boots and engine grease on his sleeve, meaning exactly what he said. "I want to help," she said. "Not because I owe you, because I want to." He nodded. "Good. We start tomorrow. Bring Nari. She makes better coffee than anyone on the team." It was a small, surprised sound, as if it had escaped before she could stop it. But it was real. From that day forward, Yuna became part of the research team. She didn't just assist, she transformed the work. Bioorganic systems that had been failing for years suddenly began functioning. Growth patterns stabilized. Rejection rates dropped to near zero. In 3 months, the lab on New Incheon produced more usable results than the entire Earth biotech program had achieved in the previous decade. Jisoo, who had watched all of this with a mixture of suspicion and growing admiration, became one of Yuna's fiercest protectors. When a journalist from the Galactic News Network requested an interview with the Valori cast-off living among humans, Jisoo intercepted the call, told the journalist exactly where he could put his request, using language that would have made a dock worker blush, and cut the transmission. "She's one of ours now," Jisoo told Do-hyun afterward, as if daring him to argue. "Anyone who wants to talk to her goes through me first." Do-hyun didn't argue. He just smiled. Yuna began learning Korean. She was clumsy with the sounds at first, mixing up words and stumbling over grammar in ways that made the crew laugh. But they laughed with her, not at her, and that made all the difference. She started cooking in the colony kitchen, producing meals that were creative, and sometimes terrible. She burned rice so badly one night that the fire alarm went off, and she stood in the kitchen covered in smoke, looking so genuinely devastated that 3 people rushed to help her clean up while assuring her that they had all done worse. Nari watched everything. She watched Yuna smile more. She watched her walk with her head up. She watched her argue with Do-hyun about engine calibrations, her voice rising with confidence and excitement. And she watched Do-hyun listen, really listen, and sometimes change his mind because Yuna was right. Nari had served Yuna in the palace for years, through the loneliness and the cold silence and the days when Yuna had not spoken a single word to anyone. She had never seen Yuna like this. She had never dared to hope for it. Meanwhile, the galaxy was beginning to notice. Reports filtered through diplomatic channels that the humans were making unexpected progress in bioorganic technology. Research institutes sent inquiries. Trade delegations that had previously ignored humanity's messages began responding. At the Galactic Council, Grand Elder Movek, the ancient patient leader of the Assembly, quietly requested updates on human scientific output. On the Valori homeworld, King Tavel received similar reports. He sat in his throne room, surrounded by advisors, and listened as they described what his discarded daughter was accomplishing on a backwater human colony. His face showed nothing, but his silence was longer than usual, and his advisors noticed. Ambassador Soren was summoned. The king's instructions were simple: go to human space, observe the situation, and determine whether the bonding contract should be renegotiated. The Valori wanted Yuna back, not because they valued her, but because they could not afford to let someone else benefit from what they had thrown away. Soren's ship left Valori space on a direct course for New Incheon. In the lab on New Incheon, Yuna was working late, her hands steady inside a bioculture chamber, when the diplomatic alert came through on the console. She read the notification. A Valori vessel had entered human space, carrying Ambassador Soren, requesting permission to land. Yuna's hands went still. Behind her, Dohyun and Jisoo had seen the same alert. The lab was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines. 6 months ago, that alert would have made Yuna's blood go cold with fear. She would have shrunk, gone silent, prepared herself for whatever punishment or humiliation was coming. But she was not the same person she had been 6 months ago. She pulled her hands from the chamber and wiped them on her work jacket. A plain human jacket with the colony's logo on the shoulder. She looked at the alert one more time. Then she looked at Dohyun. Her expression was calm. Her eyes were steady. There was no fear in them. There was steel. "Let him come," she said. Ambassador Soren's shuttle landed on New Incheon on a gray morning, when clouds sat low over the mountains and the air smelled like rain. He stepped out in full Valori diplomatic dress, silver and white robes that caught even the dull light, and turned it into something elegant. His skin glowed faintly, the soft bioluminescence of a pure-blooded Valori, on display like a flag planted in foreign soil. He had come expecting to find a mess. He had come expecting to find Yuna in some back room, forgotten, perhaps cleaning floors or sitting in a corner like the discarded thing she was supposed to be. He had rehearsed his words carefully. Polite condescension, gentle reminders of Valori's superiority, and a firm offer to correct the arrangement by taking Yuna back under terms that would benefit the Dominion. What he found instead made him stop walking. The human colony's research complex was not large, but it was alive with activity. People moved through the corridors with purpose. Engineers, scientists, technicians, some human, some not. And at the center of it all, standing in front of a wall-sized display of bioorganic growth data, giving instructions to a team of 6 researchers who were listening to her with complete attention, was Yuna. She was wearing human work clothes, a dark jacket, simple pants, boots that had seen real use. Her hair was tied back loosely. She spoke in Korean, switching to Galactic Common when addressing 2 non-human team members, her voice clear and confident. When she pointed to a section of the data and suggested a modification to the cell growth protocol, 3 people nodded and began making changes immediately. Soren stood in the doorway and watched. Yuna had not noticed him yet. He was, for the first time in his long diplomatic career, invisible in a room, and the person making him invisible was the girl he had once presented to the galaxy as a joke. Dohyun appeared at Soren's side. "Ambassador," he said, his tone polite and absolutely neutral. "Welcome to New Incheon." Soren recovered quickly. He was too experienced to let shock show for more than a heartbeat. He straightened, adjusted his robes, and offered the thin smile that had served him well in 100 negotiations. "Representative Kang, the Dominion appreciates your hospitality. I trust the princess has been manageable." "She's been remarkable," Dohyun said simply. "Would you like some tea before we talk?" They sat in a small meeting room with a window that looked out over the valley. Dohyun poured tea. Soren did not drink his. Nari stood near the door, silent, her eyes never leaving the ambassador. Soren got to the point. "The Valori Dominion has reconsidered the terms of the bonding contract," he said smoothly. "King Tavel, in his wisdom, believes that Princess Yuna would benefit from returning to her homeland, where she can receive proper guidance and contribute to Valori advancement. We are prepared to offer generous compensation to humanity for the inconvenience. Do-hyun listened. He held his tea in both hands and said nothing for a moment. Then he set the cup down. "No," he said. Soren blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No, she's not going back." The ambassador's smile tightened. "I don't think you understand the situation, Representative. This is not a request. The Dominion has significant economic and military influence. Refusing to cooperate could have consequences for your species. Trade restrictions, exclusion from key resource agreements, political isolation within the Council. You gave her to us because you thought she was nothing. You put her in stripped-down robes and marched her into the Grand Chamber like damaged goods at a clearance sale. You didn't even let her father say goodbye to her. Not that he wanted to. And now, because she turned out to be extraordinary, you want her back." He paused. "That tells me everything I need to know about what your negotiations are worth." Soren's glow flickered, a sign of strong emotion in Valori, and one he could not fully control. "You are making a serious mistake." "Maybe," Do-hyun said, "but it's our mistake to make. Yuna is part of this colony. She chose to be here, and we don't trade people." Soren stood. His composure was cracking, and he knew it. He adjusted his robes again, a nervous gesture, disguised as dignity, and said, "Then I will speak with the princess directly. She has obligations to her blood. Her father threw her away," Do-hyun said quietly. "You don't get to use that word like it means something now." But Do-hyun did not block the meeting. He asked Yuna, and Yuna agreed to see Soren. She had her own words to say. They met in the lab. Yuna stood on one side of a work table covered in data screens and bioculture samples. Soren stood on the other. Do-hyun stayed near the door. Jisoo watched from the communications room, recording everything, though she would deny this later, with a perfectly straight face. Soren began with ceremony. He spoke of the Valori Dominion's long history, its sacred traditions, and the duty of royal blood to serve the Empire. He spoke of Yuna's father, King Tavel, and his desire to welcome her home. He made it sound warm. He made it sound generous. Yuna listened to every word, then she spoke. "When I was 7 years old," she said, her voice calm and low, "I asked my father why I couldn't glow like the other children. He told me it was because I was broken." He said it in front of the entire court, and no one disagreed. "When I was 12, I asked if I could study science with the royal tutors. I was told that my education was not a priority. When I was 16, I stopped asking for anything at all. And when I was 20, my father put me in plain robes, walked me into the most powerful room in the galaxy, and gave me to a species he considered beneath him, because getting rid of me was worth more to him than keeping me." Soren opened his mouth. Yuna continued. "No one in the Dominion spoke my name without pity or disgust. I was not a daughter. I was a problem to be solved. And now you come here, to the place where people actually saw me, actually asked me what I wanted, actually let me work and think and grow, and you tell me I have a duty to my blood?" She stepped forward. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "These humans gave me a room with a window. They gave me a seat at their table. They gave me a lab, and said, 'Show us what you can do.' Not because they knew I was valuable. They didn't know that yet. They did it because they thought it was the right thing to do. That is something no one in the Valori Dominion ever did for me. Not once, not ever." She looked Soren directly in the eyes. "You want to talk about duty? I owe my duty to the people who saw me as a person first, and that was not you." Soren said nothing. His glow had dimmed completely, something that almost never happened to a Valori in public. He stood still for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the lab without another word. His shuttle left New Incheon an hour later. Within 2 days, a recording of Yuna's words appeared on the Galactic Communications Network. Jisoo claims she had no idea how it got there. She said this while drinking coffee and looking extremely satisfied. The recording spread fast. What had once been a joke became something else entirely. People across the galaxy watched a woman who had been publicly humiliated stand in a small lab on a small colony and speak with a quiet dignity that made the most powerful empire in the galaxy look very, very small. Grand Elder Movek, watching from Station Apex, issued a brief public statement. The humans continue to surprise the Council. Species that had ignored humanity's diplomatic messages began reaching out. Trade offers appeared. Research partnerships were proposed. 3 minor civilizations that had been afraid to associate with humans formally requested alliance talks. On the Valori homeworld, King Tavel watched the recording alone. He watched it twice. Then he turned off the screen and sat in the dark for a very long time. That night on New Incheon, Dohun found Yuna standing on the balcony outside her quarters. The stars were out, bright and countless over the mountains. She was leaning on the railing, looking up. "Thank you," she said without turning around. Then after a pause, "Thank you for not making me be grateful." Dohyun leaned on the railing beside her. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "You never did." They stood there together for a long time, not speaking, watching the stars turn slowly above a world that had become, against all odds, a home. 2 years after a quiet man bowed to a forgotten princess in a room full of laughter, the galaxy looked very different. Humanity's bioorganic technology program had become one of the most talked-about developments in modern galactic science. The breakthroughs that came out of New Incheon's small research lab did not just solve human problems, they opened doors that every species in the galaxy wanted to walk through. Medical implants that could grow with a patient's body, ship hulls that could repair themselves after damage, agricultural systems that could adapt to any soil on any world. The technology was revolutionary, and at the heart of it all was a woman who had once been called cursed. But the technology was not the biggest change. The biggest change was something no one had planned for. After Yuna's story spread across the galactic networks, something unexpected happened. People, beings from dozens of different species, began arriving in human space. They came alone or in small groups, carrying very little, asking for very little. They were the discarded ones, the ones their own civilizations had deemed broken, impure, or worthless. Lower castes, mixed-blood children, failed experiments of rigid social systems that measured worth by bloodline and tradition, rather than ability and heart. They came because they had watched a recording of a woman standing in a lab, speaking to a powerful man who wanted to drag her back to a cage, and they had heard her say, "These people saw me as a person first." They came because they wanted someone to see them too. Humanity, which had stumbled into galactic politics as the smallest and weakest species in the room, suddenly found itself becoming something it had never intended to be. A haven. A place where the rejected could land and breathe and start again. And instead of turning them away, humans did what humans had always done with things the rest of the world threw away. They found a use for them. They found a place for them. They said, "Show us what you can do." And then they stood back and watched in amazement as people who had been told their whole lives that they were nothing proved that they were anything but. New Incheon's population doubled, then tripled. Engineers, scientists, artists, farmers, builders, every one of them carrying skills that their homeworlds had been too blind or too proud to use. Human colonies became some of the most culturally diverse and technologically innovative places in the galaxy. It was messy. It was complicated. There were disagreements and growing pains and days when nothing worked the way it was supposed to. But it was alive, and it was growing, and it was something the galaxy had never seen before. The Galactic Council took notice. They had no choice. A special session was convened at Station Apex to consider a motion that had been debated for weeks in back channels and private meetings, granting humanity a Tier 2 species designation. It was an enormous step. Most species waited centuries for Tier 2 status. Humanity had been in the galactic community for barely 13 years. The motion was controversial, supported by some, opposed by others, and watched by everyone. Grand Elder Movek, who had led the council for longer than most species had records, made an unusual decision. He invited Una to address the full assembly. The day of the session, the Grand Chamber was full. Every platform was occupied. Delegations from hundreds of species filled the massive circular room, their conversations creating a low hum that echoed off the high walls. It was the same room where, 2 years earlier, Una had been walked in as a joke, dressed in plain robes, eyes on the floor, a thing being given away. She walked in very differently now. She entered from the main floor, wearing a simple dark suit, human-made, clean lines, nothing decorative. Behind her walked Do-hyun, steady and calm as always. Beside him was Jisoo, who looked around the chamber with the expression of someone who was daring the entire galaxy to say something stupid. Nari walked behind them, her posture straight and proud. And behind them came a team of researchers and engineers, humans and aliens alike, who had built something extraordinary together on a world most of the galaxy had never heard of. The chamber fell quiet as Una took the central platform. She looked up at the hundreds of faces and sensors and screens watching her. She took a breath. 2 years ago, she began, I stood in this room. I was brought here in stripped robes, with my eyes on the ground, and I was given away. I was given to the humans because my father believed I was worthless. And every person in this chamber, every delegation, every elder, every representative watched it happen. Some of you laughed, some of you looked away. None of you said a word. The silence in the chamber was absolute. I am not here to blame you for that. I am here because what happened next matters more. She paused. The humans took me in. They gave me a room, a meal, and a choice. They did not ask what I could do for them. They did not test my blood or measure my glow or check my lineage against a registry. A man named Kang Do-hyun looked at me, a stranger, a burden, a political trap, and he bowed, not to my title, not to my blood, to me, because where he comes from, that is how you greet a person. She looked across the chamber. I have learned many things about humans in 2 years. They are loud. They are stubborn. They argue about food and music and the correct way to fold a blanket. They make mistakes constantly and then stay up all night trying to fix them. They are not the strongest species in this room. They are not the oldest or the most advanced. Her voice grew quieter, and somehow that made it carry further. But they are the only species I have ever known that measures the worth of a person not by what that person can offer, but by the simple fact that the person exists. They did not take me in because I was useful. They did not know I would be. They took me in because, to them, a person standing alone in a room full of laughter deserves someone to stand beside them. She straightened. That is not weakness. The galaxy seems to think that kindness is weakness, that compassion is something small species practice because they cannot afford to be strong. But I am standing here today, in this chamber, before all of you. The technology that half of your delegations have been requesting access to exists because of that kindness. The alliances that have reshaped 3 sectors of space began because of that kindness. She let the words settle. That is the kind of strength that empires should be built on. Not fear, not force, not the ability to throw people away and call it tradition, but the courage to pick them up and say, you matter. Show us who you are. She stepped back. The chamber remained silent for 3 full seconds, an eternity in a room built for argument and debate. Then slowly, sound returned. Not laughter, not mockery, but the quiet shifting sound of hundreds of delegations reconsidering what they thought they knew. The vote was called an hour later. The Tier 2 designation for humanity passed with a margin so wide that even the analysts were surprised. Several Valori delegates, breaking with their king's official position, voted in favor. They did not speak about it afterward, but their votes were recorded for history. On the Valori homeworld, King Tavel received the results in his throne room. The room was empty. His advisors had been dismissed. He sat alone on a throne designed to hold a ruler who glowed with sacred light, and he read a message that had arrived from human space. It was from Una. It contained one line, a traditional Valori farewell, the kind spoken only between equals. May your stars burn long, Father. It was respectful. It was final. It was the closing of a door that would never open again. Una was no longer his daughter in any way that mattered. She was no longer Valori. She was something new, something he had created by accident, and destroyed on purpose, and lost forever, because he had never once thought to look at her and see what was actually there. Tavel turned off the screen. He did not glow. On Station Apex, the human delegation walked through the main concourse after the vote. They walked together, Do-hyun and Una side by side, Jisoo and Nari behind them, their team around them. Other delegations watched them pass. Some nodded, some offered formal greetings. A few who had laughed 2 years ago found that they could not quite meet Do-hyun's eyes. Jisoo fell into step beside Nari as they walked. She nudged the handmaiden with her elbow and grinned. Think the galaxy's done underestimating us? Nari looked at the corridor ahead, at the tall, strange, beautiful chaos of 100 species learning to share the same sky, and she smiled softly. I hope not, she said. It's funnier when they learn the hard way. Ahead of them, Do-hyun glanced at Una. She was walking with her head high, her eyes forward, her steps steady on the polished floor of a station that held the entire galaxy together. She was not glowing. She had never glowed, but there was a light in her that had nothing to do with bioluminescence, a light that no one could give her and no one could take away, because she had found it herself in a small lab on a green world, surrounded by people who had never once asked her to be anything other than who she was. Do-hyun smiled. Una caught it and raised an eyebrow. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Just thinking that the galaxy's a strange place. Strange how? He looked ahead at the long corridor stretching out before them, full of light and noise and possibility. Strange that they gave us their best and called it their worst. Strange that we're here at all. Strange that it all started because someone told me to sit quietly and not cause problems. Una laughed, a real, full laugh that echoed off the walls and made 2 nearby delegates turn their heads. You're terrible at following instructions. It's a human thing. They kept walking. The galaxy stretched out around them, vast, ancient, and no longer laughing.